Well, the women of The View have totally, absolutely 110% just lost their minds. I mean, I'm sure this is not new news to anybody who pays attention to the yentas over at The View who are just yapping consistently about absolutely I don't know what, and how ridiculous their take on things are and how out of touch with reality they really are. I'm surprised they're still going, but I think I have a theory as to why this show continues to be aired on television and how they're strategically setting this thing up. We're going to get into that because what I saw yesterday was just testament to the fact, like, you could literally analyze this if you were 15 years old and you could say, how is this even possible? How can grown adults, how can so-called educated people, journalists, people on television, people with their salaries, how could they possibly say the things they're saying? Sunny Hostin, Whoopi Goldberg, Ana Navarro, Joy Behar being the main culprits. I do not know how these so-called intellectuals are allowed to spew the nonsense they spew. It's getting to the point of just insanity, and we will get into it right now on the Time to Talk podcast. Welcome to Time to Talk. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Let's get into it. I want to react to this video. There's so much here. Now, it's an 8-minute clip. I'm going to get into it. And we're going to look, first of all, just look at Whoopi's face. Look at the disdain, the anger, and the attitude, the condescending tone that just comes with the ugliness that exudes from her. When I say ugly, I don't mean Whoopi Goldberg's physical beauty or lack thereof. I'm not even going to go there. I'm saying that the internal ugliness, her soul, which is basically dog shit, you can see it on her face. The way it comes out, her attitude and acting like she's superior. We're going to get into it. I'm going on just on a still shot. I find her disgusting and repulsive. Let's get into it right now. Let's listen to what their problem is. Okay, let me set this up. Essentially, White House press secretary, the new White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, youngest press secretary ever to have that role, came out on Monday, or was it Tuesday or Wednesday, with their first White House press briefing and announced the fact that they will be allowing for independent content creators and podcasters, YouTubers and TikTokers, people to be allowed to the White House, to apply to be allowed to the White House press briefings and to have access as media and to be treated as journalists, as alternative voices in that space, seeing that that is one of the largest sources where people are getting their news from nowadays. So they acknowledge that. That's a good thing. The View people seem to have a problem with that, so let's get into it.
New White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, gave her very first press conference where she announced that they're adding extra seats to the briefing room. Take a look.
It's essential to our team that we share President Trump's message everywhere and adapt this White House to the new media landscape in 2025. This White House believes strongly in the First Amendment. So it's why our team will work diligently to restore the press passes of the 440 journalists whose passes were wrongly revoked by the previous administration. We're also opening up this briefing room to new media voices who produce news-related content and whose outlet is not already represented by one of the seats in this room. We welcome independent journalists, podcasters, social media influencers, and content creators to apply for credentials to cover this White House. This seat in the front of the room, which is usually occupied by the press secretary's staff, will be called the new media seat. My team will review the applications and give credentials to new media applicants who meet our criteria and pass United States Secret Service requirements to enter the White House complex.
All right.
What'd she say?
She basically...
Right away, they got to say something stupid. What'd she say? All right. Like they had a problem with any of that? How was any of what she said a problem? The new media landscape, it's changing. America is changing as far as how they get their news. We're going to allow other people into the press briefings. What is the problem? Now listen to these ridiculous women, these decrepit old women.
He said that she was going to...
Can they get somebody there not so
Behind
tedious?
the Table podcast needs to apply for White House credentials.
Oh, they'd love having Joy in that room.
Joy can
I got a
talk.
question.
So wait a second. So in other words, instead of Bob Woodward, they want Kardashian? What? I don't get it.
Okay.
right? A swipe at Kim Kardashian has nothing to do with this. Kim Kardashian does not have a journalistic, aspiration. She does not have a podcast where she talks about politics. And if she did, she'd probably be in that space at this point, and she would either be independent and alternatively like qualified, like in terms of her, if she chose to go in that space, hopefully she'd be learning stuff and hopefully she'd be putting out content, and we would have an idea of whether or not she was sort of on the right track or if she was just totally batshit crazy like these women are. Right, so I'm not sure the swipe at Kim Kardashian, but she's essentially saying that any podcaster or person in an alternative news space, alternative media space, is a Kardashian-like reality star. That's her take on it. In other words, you have to be on ABC or CNN or something to be qualified or to be considered qualified to be a real journalist. They're going to talk more about that in a second, and we'll get into that. But I just find the immediate dig at Kim Kardashian, which essentially was her way of saying all podcasters and people should not be taken serious because they're all nothing but like beauty queens. The Kardashians are a lifestyle brand, is what that is. So I just find that in itself to be offensive. But let's get back to it.
Yes. Which is why I was leading us in this direction.
Yeah.
I would like this young lady this is her first job, I would like her to do a little homework. Because she said something yesterday that really pissed me off. And that was, she said, there will be no wokeness here.
Oh, yeah.
Let me explain something to you. Because without that wokeness, you might not have that job.
Yeah.
Because women were not invited to that table. Women were not invited to many tables in this nation. The reason we fought and busted our behinds to make sure that you didn't have to worry about this. And now to hear you talk about it and to hear anybody talk about the wokeness was put in place for a reason. Because black people couldn't get into colleges. Because women could not get into the colleges they wanted to go to. This is all women.
Yeah.
See, this is not black, Asian, this is all women. Women were not invited to this party. It was a man's world, and we busted our asses to make sure that this was a person's world. So please stop using that phrase and talking about, because you don't understand what you're saying.
Speaking of not understanding what you're saying, you old, washed up, decrepit looking bag of miserable bones with a pseudo-intellectual sort of stance on everything, self-righteous, holier than thou, arrogance and obnoxiousness, which just is like, at this point, it's intolerable, right? First of all, you're confusing the women's civil rights, the women's movement and women's rights movement and civil rights. You're confusing that with wokeness. So perhaps you need to learn a few things. I'm talking to you, Whoopi Goldberg. You are disgusting and a vile person. I say that, again, just to be clear, has nothing to do with your physical self. It has to do with your soul or your soulless self and the fact that you take a paycheck. Because if you're really that dumb and ignorant and these are actually your views, then I guess there's nothing I can say. However, I don't honestly think you're that stupid. I don't think you're that ignorant. I don't think you're that out of touch with reality and the landscape of what's happening in this country. I don't think you are that stupid. So that basically tells me that you were on television spewing nonsense for ratings, which are shitty anyway, for ratings, for a job and a paycheck. That's all you have. That is why you do this, and that's why you're disgusting. You are conflating wokeness. The wokeness thing has to do with, oh, little Johnny wants to chop off his penis. He wants to be a girl, and he's only 7. That's the wokeness we're talking about. Oh, we need to call you a little fairy princess. There's no such, you're a gnome. Well, you're not a boy or a girl. There's no such thing as men and women. There's no such thing as Earth. There's no such thing as the moon. There's no such thing as this, that, and the other. We'll do whatever we want. That's the wokeness we're talking about. We're talking about the idea that if a man looks at a woman across the street and says, hey, how are you? Oh, you're threatening me. That's the wokeness we're talking about. The transgender thing, putting that in our schools, telling us that I have to teach my 7-year-old about different sexes and about the possibility of being neither sex, and you could do what you want, little Johnny. That's the wokeness we're talking about. We're not talking about affirmative action and talking about the different programs and policies that were put in place over the civil rights era, the women's era, women's rights to vote, women's right in the workplaces, expanding on these civil liberties. That's not what we're talking about. So you sound like an idiot when you talk, but it's even worse because you're trying to come off as if you were intellectually superior and you're talking down to people and you're talking to this woman with such disrespect because you don't get it, or again, because you're getting a paycheck, and that is absolutely deplorable. And that's why I spit such anger and hostility to you and your whole team, because it is absolutely despicable that you have no integrity. Let's continue with these stupid yentas.
Saying about yourself that, hey, that's a terrible thing to be. It's not a terrible thing to be. That's why we fought. That's what we were fighting for, so that you could stand in that podium, so that Catherine Jean-Pierre could stand at that podium. So women of all kinds of colors and ilks, wherever they came from, whatever their belief system was, they had the opportunity.
So much respect for women and all that, and she didn't even know the former White House press secretary's name. It's Corinne, it's not Catherine, okay? Dumbass.
I think she's probably been put in there because, according to Donald Trump, she's a 10. You know that.
Okay, so now you have a woman insulting a woman, claiming she only got her job because of her looks and her sex. Like, that's not disgusting. That's not a rationale for removing this disgusting bag of bones, this wrinkly bag of bones from the air. That's not cause to remove her from the air. She thinks that in a room, one of them is espousing all this this moral idea of women and wokeness and all the rights that women have, and we fought for your rights and all these other things. And this one just took it down and went back 100 years, essentially saying that the only reason she got the job is because she looked good. Think about what's happening here. Look at these yentas and think about what's happening here and try to figure out really what's going on.
Her first press briefing. She worked in the previous Trump administration.
What I'm just saying, this is the first time that she's been she may be, but my point is that job would not maybe have been open to her.
No, I understand. I just wanted to clarify that.
Bullshit.
Yeah.
I actually think this is kind of brilliant, and I think future Democratic White Houses should do the same thing. We're realizing this election, how people consume media has drastically changed. This was the Joe Rogan, Theo Vaughn, Alex Cooper election. It wasn't mainstream old school media that was driving people's interest in what they were following and the stories they were. And I think this is an acknowledgement that Trump realizes this. This is a person who made his career in television.
What's to prevent?
Exactly. She gets it. She's one of there's only two of them on that show that get it. Alyssa, I think Griffin is her name. She gets it, and there's one more, Sarah, I forgot what her name is, but she gets it. It was a very clearly thought out what she said. Her response was, it was very to the point. Yes, the landscape has changed. Media has changed. People are getting their news that way. It's not far-fetched. Future Democratic administrations are probably going to do it again. This is something it has nothing to do with a partisan decision. It doesn't. There's no advantage to the Trump administration, right? That wouldn't be there for the later administrations, for Democratic, whoever's in the White House. This is strictly a technological, cultural shift. It's a moment in history where media, it's been happening for a while, but this is the first White House to really acknowledge it and do something about it. And she eloquently articulated the obviousness of it. It's the rest of them that don't get it because they're holding on to their, let's just keep going.
Those only on his side.
Well, there will be partisans, but I think it was promising that they brought in Axios, which is mainstream, but then they brought in Breitbart, which is a right-wing outlet. And so some of the outlets that had their passes revoked when Biden came in were right-of-center outlets. I don't have a problem with partisan outlets being there as long as it's representative of both sides and you have non-biased traditional media there as well.
Well, she's off there when she says also having non-biased traditional media there. Non-biased traditional media, legacy media, former mainstream media is super biased. They're bought by their propagandist arms of the government. That's what they are. So that was a little off. But she's right in her overall sentiment that you would have to Joy Behar is making the claim, what if you only have the people that he wants? Well, that's kind of the way White Houses work. That's kind of the way the government has always had their propagandist people spewing what they want as far as their narrative. That's what the Biden administration was doing, right? So, and we'll get into that in a second as well. But Yeah, I think to be fair, the point being you should have representatives from the left and from the right. If it's going to be fair and the media is going to be open, you can't just have Joe Rogan bros and people, Theo Von and people who are, clearly MAGA or pro-Trump. You can't just have those influencers and those podcasters there. You're going to need to have a definite diverse representation. So that's actually true. But let's continue with these women.
It's fact-driven how they cover.
She's saying that these people that are going to apply will meet their criteria. We understand that their criteria is woefully deficient and unserious. Right. I think that their real problem in this election, one of the real problems among the many, is the misinformation and disinformation that was disseminated on social media by these influencers and by these podcasters.
Moron. Listen to how ridiculous it is. This woman is an attorney, right? Former prosecutor, I believe. Moron. Perfect example of what I always tell people. You can get law degrees, you can get master's degrees, PhDs, and still be an idiot. Now, going back to my previous statement when it came to Whoopi Goldberg, do I believe she's actually this stupid and ignorant and that out of touch with reality and the real news and what really happened when it comes to misinformation, disinformation in the Biden administration and all of the revelations and things that have now finally been confirmed in terms of the big tech companies aligning themselves with the Biden administration and government specifically to push out their narrative and make sure they were controlling information. That's what they were doing. They weren't allowing people to put truth out there. How many examples can I go through? We can just use the recent pandemic and COVID. They wanted to control everything. You can't say this. You can't say it came from a lab. You can't say this. You can't say that. You can't say get vitamin D. How is she on television? How does she call herself an attorney? How does she represent herself as an intellectual? I'd love to bump into her at a party and just embarrass her, right? How do you do that? And yet you don't know the truth of, well, actually, we just found out, and we do know that the Biden administration was doing this. When it comes to misinformation and disinformation and social media, it wasn't Joe Rogan promoting that. It wasn't alternative news sources. Glenn Greenwald wasn't pushing out misinformation and disinformation. Brett Weinstein wasn't pushing out misinformation. Seriously, Tucker Carlson, Russell Brand, Matt Taibbi, they weren't putting out disinformation and misinformation. Zuckerberg aligned with the Biden administration and they were actively working to control the narrative. How does she not know that? If she doesn't know that, then she's an ignoramus. If she does know it and she's spewing the crap that she's spewing right now, then she is a soulless, heartless piece of shit because she knows she's taking a paycheck in order to spit that narrative. That's the problem I have. Oh, I'm just fired up with these stupid yentas.
Why front in the White House briefing room and tell America what is going on with the country? Traditionally, to become a White House correspondent or to be in that briefing room, you had to have a journalism degree. Yeah. You had to have qualifications. Yeah. So I guess the rise of mediocrity is here to stay.
Rise of mediocrity is here to stay. You have to have qualifications. Yeah, back in the day, possibly you had a couple, there was a traditional route of going to school and getting a degree in journalism. And I suppose, there was some particular standard that was set. But I got news for you. The media and the media being a reflection of the people and holding a mirror up to our government and having that position and that direct link between government and its citizens. The media nowadays is a person in Gaza holding up a cell phone showing you what's going on. That's what media is. That's what journalism is nowadays. I'm not suggesting that someone holding up a cell phone and capturing images of what's actually taking place somewhere in the world, that's everything. That means they could write an interesting, an article on the same level as Matt Taibbi. That's not what I'm suggesting. But media, the landscape has entirely changed. The landscape has changed for plenty of professions where you no longer need a degree or to go to a formal school with formal education to actually work in a particular field and be really good at it. There are plenty of people. I got news for you. Russell Brand is not a traditional journalist. He's not. He's not a traditional journalist. The man was an actor, sex addict, drug addict, comedian, former sex addict, drug addict. He's now turned his life over to Christ. He's born again Christian, and God bless Russell Brand. But have you listened to Russell Brand? Have you gone through any of his podcasts or listened to any of the things that he says? This man is way more qualified than Sunny Hostin would be on any day of her life. Period. Sonny Hostin probably couldn't keep up with his vocabulary. That's exactly how articulate and super highly intelligent genius level that Russell Brand is. He chose to give his time and energy to the podcasting space and to pretty much identify a lot of the issues that are taking place on a global basis. And he does a really good job at it, staying objective, staying in the middle, and just reporting on things and giving you his perspective and his take on things. That's what journalism is. He does. Matt Taibbi, journalist. Walter Kern, journalist. Like Glenn Greenwald, one of the most highly respected journalists, period. He's on Rumble right now. Does that make him any less qualified, or does it make him less of a journalist because he's not on CNN or Fox or ABC or NBC? Is he less of a journalist? Who are you telling who's qualified, who's not qualified, when you are a total loser for taking a paycheck and being an ignoramus and shucking and jiving for your masa? Because that's what you are, my sister.
No, but you guys are minimizing something really important here. There was a time where there were 3 evening broadcasts for news. Yes. Everyone sat down around the TV and they watched these 3 news outlets. Mm-hmm. Now you look at where people consume news. 54% of American adults say they get news from social media. A large majority of U.S. adults, 86%, say they get at least some of their information. If you don't want mis and disinformation, which is inevitable obviously with this administration, but if you want to go directly to the source and have people receive it themselves and put it out to their audiences, I'd rather have them in that room. And influencers are not just the Kardashians. They're also the Brene Browns. Mm-hmm. You've got podcasts like Pod Saves America. There are people that only consume their news from other...
They show up.
And I
made sense as well. She did say something stupid, saying that with this administration, you're going to get disinformation and misinformation. Yeah, with any administration, okay, especially the previous one, that was just found guilty of doing it. What are you talking about? She made a great point. She's kind of like on the right path of understanding all this, but at the same point, she had to go in and throw something stupid in.
Let's see if the mainstream media got a lot wrong in recent years. And while there are editorial standards, I don't think that we can definitively say, because you have this degree and you're with this outlet, you've never gotten news information wrong.
Well, I will say this. I feel a lot better when I know there are standards people have to meet.
Yeah, of course.
And so
qualifications
you can bring in whoever you want. The proof will be in the pudding. Mm-hmm. We can stand and say, this is terrible, but so we're going to wait and see what happens. And the minute it turns out to be state-run television or state-run information or state-run news, because, I disagree that people got stuff wrong. I don't know what people were looking for, because the people I talked to were not looking for the things that these folks were looking for. And now that they've got him, are they getting what they want? So that's just my opinion.
But even on the media front, we haven't gotten to this real quickly this week. The CIA came out and said that COVID very likely came from a lab leak. And the New York Times shut down coverage of that. They wouldn't publish an op-ed by a senator from Arkansas, Tom Cotton, saying that this was a credentialed theory. At the time I was at DOD and that was openly discussed, is a very real possibility.
Confidence by the CIA.
There is a fact that the media at times has gotten things wrong.
Listen,
so
it isn't about whether they get it wrong or right. It's what they do to correct it. That's the problem.
And they don't do shit to correct it. CNN has still yet to retract any of their stories or false stories and their narratives that they pushed all through COVID. They haven't said a single apology. They haven't come on TV in interest of their own ass, in interest of their own viewers and the demise of their stupid network. They have yet to come on TV and say, okay, we got that wrong. You know what? We were wrong about that. Yes, we were wrong about that. Well, they have not done a single thing. So why is Whoopi Goldberg sitting there saying, as long as what are you talking about?
Matter, yeah.
That's what I want.
But it also matters that the CIA said that it was a low confidence report, and that is why the New York Times, which has standards, didn't report on it.
New York Times has standards? Yes. Possibly, 20 years ago? 30 years ago they had standards? What are you talking about? Have you read the New York Times lately? Have you paid attention to New York Times? Do you want to go through the New York Times with me, Sonny Hostin? Meet me at a coffee shop, because you are ridiculously stupid.
Saying that it's not even a considered theory was what the mistake was.
The mistake really is there's too much BS floating out there, and now it's out of our hands. There's no way to control it. So now they're saying they're going to control it. I want to see what they're going to do.
Exactly. It's out of our hands. So we went through this recently where we understand that they want to get rid of the First Amendment and they want to control the narrative. It's out of our hands. You see the language she used? Same thing as the Biden administration that they were using for, well, it's out of our hands. Oh, we got to do something about it. It's the same thing that, what's his name? John Kerry was saying the same thing. We can't control it. Same thing Hillary Clinton was saying. We can't control it. They want to control it. Anytime a government is outright admitting to you and telling you we need to be able to control what's being said and not said, that is your first indication of they are violating your First Amendment right of free speech. And anyone who gets their ass on TV and talks about this stuff and acts as if for some strange reason they don't know that the previous administration, the administration and the party that they are defending is guilty of that crime, the very crime they're talking about and blaming the other people for. If you're unaware of that, you don't have business on TV. You are unqualified. You don't have standards. I'm sorry, people. I get fired up with this one in particular, and the insults have been hurled because I do not understand how these people exist in their personal life. I have to question how they operate in their personal life. It's just like, if I know what I know, which I do, right? And if you watch my channel, you'll see what I believe and what things I talk about and what I know. If I knew all that, and then I decided to get in front of this microphone, get in front of my audience, the people who have subscribed, thank you. I appreciate everyone who's already subscribed. The people who have not subscribed, hit that subscribe button. If I sat here, and just started saying stuff that was totally against everything else I said, and I act like I ignored all the things I've learned and all the things that I've seen, all the things that I've researched. And I just started spitting out something else in the interest of a paycheck. Let's say somebody was paying me to do that. At night, I couldn't sleep. I'm sorry. There's not enough money in the world. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. You never know a man's true intentions or how a person's going to act or what his standard of morals are until he's in a situation where he has access to everything, right? Somebody saying, oh, I would never cheat or do all these weird things. Yeah, make the man a $50 million or make him a billionaire and put him on the Riviera somewhere with 1 billion beautiful women and see if he still remains loyal, right? Like, you can't really speculate on that. I don't know. Someone hands me a check for $10 million and said, hey, we want you to change your channel to start talking about it from this perspective. I might take that $10 million depending on my situation. But I'll tell you right now, I wouldn't sleep at night. I would not sleep at night. I would have a hard time being a father and a husband, and I have a hard time looking at people in the face. These women have no problem looking people in the face when they leave that set. When they take off that cruddy makeup off their ugly old faces, they leave the studio. Who are they actually appealing to at this point? They're appealing to the same type of people. They're appealing to people who are in a bubble who know nothing. So it's a bunch of old women, ignorant women, people who've never, and a bunch of pseudo-intellectuals, let's face it, because I've had conversations with people who watch The View and they act like they're informed, they act like they're reasonably intelligent, but like, you can't get them past The View. Like, that's their main news source, and they defend Whoopi Goldberg. They defend Ana Navarro. They defend Joy Behar. They think these people are like the truth. And if that's the case, that's their audience. They're just but and if the show is supposed to be designed to provide some sort of spectacle, like some fighting there, like between Sarah and Allison, right, and the rest of them, because they actually had a different take. Like, let it be real. Like, let them really go to task. I think that would be way more entertaining. I'd like to see some real infighting. I'd like to see some real facts thrown around. I'd like to see some left and right perspective really go at each other and have because the Democrats wouldn't survive. Whoopi would not survive. Sunny Hostin would not survive. Not in this current landscape, not based on what the Democrats have been doing for the last 10, 15, 16 years. Like, there's no way that they would win. Anyway, enough. Time to Talk podcast. I had to talk about The View. I had to go in on it. I could probably watch. I don't watch it all the time. But yesterday, I just thought, after hearing what I heard and being very excited about the White House's approach to the new media landscape, I wanted to talk about this when I heard their nonsense. So, again, subscribe if you've not subscribed. Hit the notification bell on the way out. I truly appreciate that. Like this video. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Are you someone who watches The View? Are you one of those zombies that pays attention to The View and thinks that's all real? Let me know if I've gone in too hard on them. And I'll catch you on the next Time to Talk podcast. Peace.